The rain hammered against the tinted windows of the black SUV, each drop a sharp staccato that matched the frantic beating of my heart. I clutched the worn handles of the double stroller, my knuckles white beneath the cheap fabric of my soaked jacket. The crosswalk signal blinked red, but I was already halfway across, desperate to reach the pharmacy on the other side before it closed. My daughter Emma had been burning with fever all afternoon, and my son Lucas wouldn't stop coughing. Those wet, rattling sounds that made my chest tighten with fear every time I heard them. The city smelled like exhaust fumes and wet asphalt, mixed with the acrid scent of garbage from the overflowing bins on the corner. My sneakers squelched with each step, water seeping through the holes I'd been meaning to patch for months. 3 years. 3 years since I'd walked away from everything I knew, carrying nothing but the clothes on my back and the secret growing inside me. 3 years of working double shifts at the diner, of counting pennies, of telling myself that freedom was worth the hunger, worth the fear, worth the bone-deep exhaustion that had become my constant companion. I was invisible in this city, just another struggling single mother in a sea of people, too busy to notice the woman pushing a battered stroller through the rain. The SUV appeared like a predator emerging from shadows. Sleek, black, and impossibly expensive, it rolled to a stop at the intersection. And even through the rain and the tinted windows, I felt it, that presence. That suffocating weight I'd spent 3 years trying to forget. My feet froze mid-step. The passenger window descended with a mechanical whisper, and the world tilted on its axis. Through the gap, I caught a glimpse of charcoal gray wool. A suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent. The scent that escaped the vehicle made my stomach clench. Bergamot and cedarwood. Expensive and unmistakable. A scent that used to cling to my skin. That used to make me feel safe before I learned that safety was just another word for cage. Keep moving, Elena. My voice was barely a whisper, lost in the drum of rain. But the SUV's door opened, time fragmented into sharp crystalline pieces. A black leather shoe touched the wet pavement. Italian, polished to a mirror shine despite the rain. Then another. A figure emerged, and even backlit by the city lights, I would have known that silhouette anywhere. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the predatory grace of someone who had never known fear, because he was the thing others feared. Dante Moretti. My hands trembled on the stroller handles. Emma stirred, her small face flushed with fever, and Lucas coughed again, the sound weak and pitiful. The rain plastered my hair to my face, and I knew I looked like exactly what I was. A woman who had been broken down by life, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but survival instinct and love for her children. He stood there in the rain, and he didn't move, didn't speak. Behind him, I could see movement in the SUV, at least 2 other figures, their shapes suggesting the bulk of body armor beneath expensive suits. His security. Of course. Dante Moretti never went anywhere without an army at his back. I should have kept walking, should have lowered my head and pushed past him, pretended I was just another stranger on a city street. But my body had betrayed me, rooted to the spot by 3 years of nightmares and the visceral memory of what it meant to be in his orbit. Then his gaze dropped to the stroller. The world stopped. I watched his expression change. Watched the cold mask of the man who ruled the city's underworld crack, just enough to let something else through. His eyes, dark as midnight and twice as dangerous, fixed on the 2 small faces visible beneath the stroller's rain cover, Emma with her dark curls and his sharp cheekbones, Lucas with his olive skin and the stubborn set of his jaw that was pure Moretti. The twins were 2 years and 4 months old enough to have his features stamped on their faces like an undeniable truth I'd tried so hard to deny. Behind Dante, another figure emerged from the SUV. A woman, tall, willowy, dressed in cream-colored designer clothes that probably cost more than I made in a year. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the rain, and diamonds glittered at her throat, the kind of diamonds that declared ownership, that marked territory. She had her hand on the car door, her expression impatient, annoyed at the delay. His fiancée. The woman the newspapers called Victoria Castellano, daughter of the Castellano crime family. The alliance that would unite 2 of the most powerful mafia organizations on the East Coast. Dante? Her voice cut through the rain, sharp with confusion and irritation. What's the delay? But he didn't turn toward her. didn't acknowledge her at all. His attention was locked on the stroller with an intensity that made my skin prickle with warning. I could see his mind working behind those dark eyes, could almost hear the calculations, the realizations clicking into place like bullets sliding into a chamber. The rain grew heavier, and somewhere in the distance, a car horn blared. The crosswalk signal had changed twice since I'd frozen here, trapped between the woman I'd been and the life I'd built from ashes. Dante. Victoria's voice again, louder this time, edged with the kind of entitlement that came from never having been denied anything. We're going to be late for... He moved. 3 steps brought him close enough that I could see the muscle ticking in his jaw, close enough that his presence engulfed me like a physical force, close enough that I caught the full impact of his scent and felt my traitorous body respond with memory, with the ghost of a time when I'd believed his darkness could shelter rather than consume. Elena. My name on his lips was a weapon and a caress, rough with something I couldn't name and didn't want to recognize. Those children, I found my voice somewhere in the depths of my terror, are none of your concern. His hand moved, not toward me, but toward the stroller. One of his men materialized beside him instantly, a wall of muscle in a black suit, hand inside his jacket where I knew a gun waited, but Dante waved him back with a subtle gesture, his attention never leaving my face. How old? The question was soft, deadly soft, the tone he used right before someone disappeared from the streets forever. 2. The word escaped before I could stop it. Mathematics was a merciless thing. I watched him do the calculation, watched the moment he understood that 9 months before the twins' birth put their conception exactly at the time when I'd still been his, when I'd still been naive enough to believe I could love a monster without becoming a monster myself. Emma coughed, a small sound that shattered the moment. My hands tightened on the stroller handles, maternal instinct overriding 3 years of fear. I need to go. They're sick. Get in the car. It wasn't a request. No. The word hung between us like a grenade with the pin pulled. Behind him, Victoria had stepped fully out of the SUV now, her expression transforming from annoyance to sharp interest. She was moving closer, her heels clicking on the wet pavement, and I could see the exact moment she registered the situation, the way Dante was looking at me, the stroller. The undeniable mathematics of the children's age. Dante? Her voice had changed, taking on a dangerous edge. Who is this woman? He didn't answer her, didn't even glance in her direction. His focus remained absolute, pinning me in place with the weight of his attention. Elena, get in the car. We're not having this conversation in the rain while my children are sick. My children. The possessive pronoun landed like a punch to my solar plexus. This was the moment I'd dreaded for 3 years, the nightmare that had woken me gasping in the dark. The moment when Dante Moretti discovered he was a father and decided what to do about it. They're not... I started. But Lucas chose that moment to break into a coughing fit that racked his tiny body, and Emma began to cry, her fever-bright eyes confused and frightened by the strange man looming over us. Dante's expression shifted again, and something that might have been concern flickered across his features before the mask slammed back into place. He turned his head slightly, not looking away from me, but somehow addressing the man standing behind him. Marco, clear the pharmacy. Get their best pediatrician. Now. Marco, built like a tank, with scars that suggested he'd survived situations that would kill normal men, pulled out his phone and began barking orders in rapid Italian. I don't need your help, I said, but my voice cracked on the words because that was a lie. I needed help desperately. The pharmacy visit was just the start. I needed the money for medicine I couldn't afford, for the doctor's visit I'd been putting off, for the heating in our apartment that had stopped working 2 days ago. Pride was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore, but accepting help from Dante Moretti was a price I wasn't sure I could survive paying. Elena. He said my name like a prayer and a threat. You can get in the car willingly, or I can put you and the children in it myself. But one way or another, you're not walking away from me again. His voice dropped lower, intimate despite Victoria's presence, despite his men surrounding us. Not now. Not ever. The rain continued to fall, washing away the last 3 years of carefully constructed distance, of hard-won freedom. of the illusion that I could ever truly escape the gravity well of Dante Moretti's world. Victoria was close enough now that I could see the cold calculation in her blue eyes, the way she assessed me and found me wanting, poor, bedraggled, nothing. But her gaze sharpened when she looked at the stroller, when she saw the unmistakable Moretti features on my children's faces. "This is her?" Victoria's voice was ice wrapped in silk. "The whore who ran away 3 years ago." The word landed like a slap, but before I could respond, Dante moved. His hand shot out and caught Victoria's wrist with enough force to make her gasp, his grip visibly painful even from where I stood. "Choose your next words very carefully," he said, his voice so cold that I felt Victoria shiver despite her expensive coat. "That woman is the mother of my children. The next person who disrespects her won't live long enough to regret it." The threat hung in the air, and I saw the moment Victoria understood that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Whatever alliance their engagement represented, whatever political benefits it brought to his organization, it meant nothing compared to the 2 small children coughing in the rain-soaked stroller. He released her wrist and turned back to me, and in his eyes, I saw the truth I'd been running from for 3 years. Dante Moretti never let go of what belonged to him, and whether I liked it or not, I had just been reclaimed. The pharmacy was empty by the time we entered, its fluorescent lights harsh against my rain-soaked skin. I'd watched through the SUV's tinted windows as Marco and 2 other men in dark suits had simply walked in, spoken briefly to the manager, and within minutes, every customer had been ushered out. A closed for emergency maintenance sign appeared on the door. The speed and efficiency of it made my stomach turn. This was Dante's world, where money and fear could reshape reality in minutes. I'd tried to refuse getting in the vehicle, had clutched the stroller handles and planted my feet on the wet pavement. But Emma's crying had grown more desperate, and Lucas's breathing had taken on a wheezing quality that terrified me more than Dante ever could. So I'd climbed into the SUV with as much dignity as I could muster, which was none at all, and pretended not to notice how Victoria had been left standing on the curb, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. Now, inside the pharmacy, Dante stood beside me but not touching, his presence a constant weight I couldn't ignore. The pharmacist, a nervous man in his 50s with trembling hands, was preparing medication under Marco's watchful eye, while another of Dante's men stood by the door, hand resting casually on the gun I could see beneath his jacket. I knelt beside the stroller, unbuckling Emma first. Her small body was hot against mine as I lifted her, her dark curls damp with fever sweat. She buried her face in my neck, whimpering, and I felt the familiar ache of helplessness that came with watching your child suffer and being unable to fix it. "Let me see her." Dante's voice was soft, but it still made me tense. I turned slightly, creating a barrier between him and Emma with my body, an instinct I couldn't suppress, even though logic said he wouldn't hurt his own child. But logic had nothing to do with the fear that had been carved into my bones during the last year I'd spent in his world, when I'd finally understood what kind of man I'd fallen in love with. "She doesn't know you," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady for Emma's sake. "You'll frighten her." Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or anger at the truth of my words. His children were 2 years old, and to them, he was a stranger. A tall, dark stranger who radiated danger like other men, radiated cologne. "Then introduce me." It wasn't a suggestion. I closed my eyes briefly, gathering strength I didn't have. Emma shifted in my arms, her fever-bright eyes opening to peer at the man looming over us. I felt her small body tense, ready to cry again. "Emma, baby," I whispered, smoothing her damp curls back from her forehead. This is Dante. He's going to help make you feel better." The lie tasted like ash on my tongue. He wasn't here to help. He was here because he'd discovered a secret that changed everything. Because Dante Moretti never walked away from what he considered his property, and I had just given him 2 more reasons to never let me go. Emma studied him with that intense way children have of seeing more than adults want a reveal. Then, surprising us both, she reached out one small hand toward him. "Hot," she whimpered. "Mama, hot." Dante's entire demeanor changed. The dangerous crime lord who'd threatened his fiancée in the middle of a street disappeared, replaced by something I didn't recognize, something almost vulnerable. He moved closer, slowly, like approaching a frightened animal, and his hand, the same hand that had probably signed death warrants, that had pulled triggers and broken bones, reached out with infinite gentleness to touch Emma's forehead. His jaw tightened. She's burning up. Where the hell is that doctor? As if summoned, the pharmacy door opened, and a woman in her 40s entered, carrying a black medical bag. She wore expensive clothes beneath a designer raincoat, and her expression suggested she was used to middle-of-the-night summons from powerful men. Marco must have called her from the car. "Dr. Chen," Dante said, his tone brooking no argument. "My daughter has a fever. My son is coughing. Fix it." "Doctor." Chen's eyes widened slightly at the word daughter, but she recovered quickly, professional mask sliding into place. "Let me examine them. Is there somewhere private?" The pharmacist, still trembling, gestured toward a small consultation room at the back. Dante's hand moved to the small of my back, possessive, proprietary, guiding me toward it before I could protest. The touch sent electricity through my rain-soaked clothes, a traitorous reminder of how my body still recognized his, still responded despite everything I knew about him. The consultation room was cramped, barely large enough for the examination table, a chair, and the four of us. Me, Dante, Dr. Chen, and Marco, standing guard at the door. I laid Emma on the table, then lifted Lucas from the stroller. He was quieter than his sister, but his breathing was labored, and fear clawed at my throat. "Doctor." Chen worked efficiently, checking temperatures, listening to lungs, examining throats with a practiced eye. I held Lucas while she examined Emma, then switched, trying to ignore how Dante watched every movement, how his presence filled the small room until there was no air left to breathe. "Viral infection," Dr. Chen finally announced, pulling off her stethoscope. "Nothing immediately life-threatening, but they need fever reducers, plenty of fluids, and monitoring. The boy's lungs sound congested. I'm prescribing an inhaler and antibiotics as a precaution against secondary infection." Relief made my knees weak, not serious. They would be okay. What about their living conditions? Dante's question was sharp, directed at the doctor, but his eyes were on me. Could that be contributing? Dr. Chen hesitated, and I felt my face flush with shame. She'd seen the children's clothes, worn but clean, cheap but cared for. She could probably guess at the rest. The cold apartment, the irregular meals when money was tight, the stress that clung to me like a second skin. "Adequate warmth and nutrition are important for recovery," she said carefully, diplomatically, "and for preventing future infections." "I take care of my children," I said, my voice harder than I'd intended. I was tired. So tired of being judged, of being found wanting. They're loved and fed and living in poverty. Dante's words cut like a knife. "Don't lie to me, Elena. I can see it. The holes in your shoes, the way you're shaking. And that's not just from the rain. When did you last eat a full meal?" I wanted to hit him. Wanted to scream that this was his fault. That I'd had to choose between the cage of his world and the freedom of poverty. That there was no good choice when you loved a monster. But Emma was watching with fever-glazed eyes, and Lucas was whimpering in my arms, and falling apart was a luxury I couldn't afford. "That's none of your business anymore," I said instead, my voice cold. "Thank you for the doctor. We'll take the medication and go." "Go where?" His tone was deceptively mild, but I heard the steel beneath it. "Back to whatever hovel you've been living in. Back to working yourself to death while my children get sick from inadequate heating. It's my home. They're my children. And we've been fine. They're my children too." The words were quiet, but they hit with the force of a physical blow. "And you kept them from me for over 2 years. The accusation hung between us, justified and terrible." Dr. Chen cleared her throat uncomfortably, gathering her equipment. "I'll give the prescriptions to your pharmacist. The children should start feeling better within 24 hours. If the fever doesn't break or the breathing worsens, take them to the hospital immediately." Dante nodded dismissal, and she fled, leaving Marco to close the door behind her. The room felt smaller than ever, suffocating with unsaid words and 3 years of secrets. "You don't understand," I started, but he cut me off. "Then explain." He moved closer, not touching but close enough that I could feel his body heat, could smell the bergamot and cedarwood that used to mean safety. Explain why you disappeared in the middle of the night. Explain why you never told me you were pregnant. Explain why I've spent 3 years thinking you were dead while you raised my children in poverty. His voice cracked on the last word, and I realized with shock that Dante Moretti, the man who ruled the underworld with an iron fist, who never showed weakness, was furious and hurt in equal measure. I was afraid, I whispered, the truth escaping before I could stop it. Of you. Of what you'd become. Of what staying in your world would do to them. So you chose this instead? He gestured around the cramped room, toward the poverty I'd been trying so hard to deny. You chose to struggle alone, to let my children go without, rather than accept my protection? Your protection comes with a price I wasn't willing to pay. And what price is that? I looked up at him then, meeting those dark eyes that had once made me feel cherished and had later made me feel owned. My soul. My freedom. Everything that makes me human instead of just another possession in your collection. The silence that followed was broken only by Lucas's labored breathing and Emma's small whimpers. Dante's jaw worked, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides, a tell I remembered, a sign he was fighting for control. I never tried to own you, he said finally, his voice rough. I loved you. You loved the idea of me. The version of me that smiled and looked beautiful on your arm and never asked questions about the blood on your shirts or the screams I heard from the basement. My voice shook, but I kept going, 3 years of silence finally breaking. You loved me the way someone loves a painting. Something beautiful to possess, to display, to keep locked away from the world. That's not... He stopped, and for a moment, I saw something like uncertainty cross his face. I protected you. You suffocated me. And when I found out I was pregnant, I shifted Lucas in my arms, his small weight a reminder of everything at stake. I knew I had to choose, stay and raise them in your world, where violence is normal and morality is negotiable, where they'd grow up thinking that power justifies anything, or leave and give them a chance at something better. Better? His laugh was bitter. You call this better? Living in poverty, working yourself to exhaustion, my children getting sick because you can't afford proper heating? That's what you chose? Yes. The word was firm, even though my arms ached from holding Lucas, even though exhaustion made my vision blur. Because at least here, they learn that people matter more than power. That kindness isn't weakness. That love doesn't come with conditions and contracts, and the constant threat of violence. Dante stared at me, and in his expression, I saw a war being waged between the man he'd become and whatever remained of the person he'd been before the Moretti family business had consumed him entirely. Elena, he said finally, and his voice held a note I'd never heard before. Something almost pleading. I can't let you go. Not now. Not knowing I have children who need me. Need you? I shook my head. They need food and warmth and safety. They need a mother who isn't constantly looking over her shoulder. They don't need a father who solves problems with bullets and bribes. They need both. He moved closer, and this time he did touch me, one hand cupping my face with a gentleness that made my traitorous body remember every moment I'd loved him. And whether you want to accept it or not, you need me too. How long can you keep this up, Elena? How long before exhaustion makes you sick? Before you can't work anymore and lose even the little you have? His thumb traced my cheekbone, and I hated that my eyes burned with tears I refused to shed. He was right, and that was the cruelest part. I was drowning, had been drowning for 3 years, kept afloat only by stubborn pride and desperate love for my children. I won't go back to being your prisoner, I whispered. Then don't. His eyes locked with mine, intense and dark, and full of something dangerous. But don't deny my children what they deserve either. Let me help them, Elena. Let me give them what you can't. The offer hung between us, tempting and terrible, because I knew that accepting help from Dante Moretti meant accepting chains, even if they were made of gold. It meant stepping back into his orbit, where his gravity would pull me closer and closer until escape became impossible again. But Emma whimpered in fever pain, and Lucas's breathing rattled in his chest, and I was so tired of being strong, of being alone, of pretending I could carry the weight of the world on my shoulders without breaking. "What do you want?" I asked, and hated how defeated I sounded. His smile was sharp as a blade. "Everything. But for now, I want you and the children to come home with me. Tonight, we'll discuss the rest tomorrow." "And if I refuse?" His hand dropped from my face, but his eyes held mine captive. "Then I'll have Marco drive you back to your apartment, and tomorrow morning, you'll find that your landlord has mysteriously decided to evict you. Your employer at the diner will suddenly have concerns about your performance. Every door you try to walk through will close in your face until you have nowhere left to go but back to me." The threat was delivered calmly, matter-of-factly, and I knew with sickening certainty that he meant every word. This was Dante Moretti, the man who owned half the city, who could reshape reality with a phone call, who never accepted defeat. "That's not a choice," I said, my voice hollow. "That's coercion. That's reality." He stepped back, giving me physical space even as his words trapped me more thoroughly than chains ever could. "I've spent 3 years thinking you were dead, Elena. 3 years mourning you. And now I find out you've been alive, raising my children, suffering alone because you were too proud or too afraid to ask for help. You made your choice 3 years ago. Now it's my turn." The door opened, and Marco entered carrying 2 pharmacy bags bulging with medications. Behind him, the pharmacist hovered anxiously, probably terrified about what he'd witnessed, and desperate for us to leave. "The car's ready, boss," Marco said, his scarred face impassive. "And I've sent men to Miss Castellano's residence with her belongings and a message. Victoria." I'd almost forgotten about her, about the engagement that had presumably been shattered the moment Dante had discovered his children's existence. I should have felt guilty, but I was too numb, too overwhelmed by the avalanche of change that had destroyed my carefully constructed life in the space of an hour. "Good." Dante took the pharmacy bags, then held out his hand to me, not commanding, but offering. "Come on, let's get them home and warm and medicated. We'll figure out the rest later." I looked at his hand, at the gold ring on his smallest finger bearing the Moretti crest, at the scars on his knuckles that told stories of violence I'd never wanted to know. Then I looked at Lucas in my arms, at Emma lying exhausted on the examination table, at the choice that wasn't really a choice at all. I took his hand. His fingers closed around mine, warm, strong, possessive. And I felt the trap snap shut around me once again. But this time, I wasn't walking into it blind. This time I knew exactly what kind of monster I was dealing with, and this time, I had 2 small reasons to fight back. The Moretti estate hadn't changed in 3 years. The same imposing iron gates, the same manicured grounds visible even through the rain and darkness, the same sense of stepping into a world where normal rules didn't apply. The SUV rolled up a circular driveway paved with stones that probably cost more than my annual salary, coming to a stop before a mansion that looked like something out of a Gothic novel. All dark stone and tall windows and the kind of architecture designed to intimidate. I'd sworn I'd never see this place again. Emma had fallen into a fitful sleep against my shoulder, her small body radiating heat through her worn clothing. Lucas was awake but quiet in Dante's arms, a development that had surprised us both when he'd reached for his father in the car, too sick and exhausted to maintain stranger danger. Watching Dante hold his son for the first time, seeing the careful way he supported Lucas's head, the almost frightened tenderness in his expression, had done something dangerous to my heart. I couldn't afford to remember the man I'd fallen in love with. That man had been an illusion, a mask the monster wore when it suited him. The front doors opened before we reached them, and a woman in her 60s appeared. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, her face creasing with shock when she saw me. Behind her, I could see staff members gathering, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. The woman who'd run away from Dante Moretti, who'd humiliated him by disappearing, was not someone who would be welcomed back easily. "Prepare the east wing," Dante said, not breaking stride as he carried Lucas inside. 3 bedrooms, connecting. One for Elena, one for the children, one for their nanny. I want humidifiers set up in the children's room, fresh linens, heating set to 75 degrees. Have Dr. Martinez on standby in case the fever worsens overnight. Mrs. Chen recovered quickly, her professionalism overriding her surprise. Of course, Mr. Moretti. Will you be needing dinner prepared? For Elena, yes, whatever she wants. And warm milk for the children, something gentle on their stomachs. He paused at the base of a sweeping staircase, finally looking at me. What do they like to eat? The question was so domestic, so normal, that it felt surreal coming from a man whose enemies tended to disappear into the river. Toast, I said quietly, with a little butter and applesauce. But they might not want to eat with the fever. We'll try anyway. He started up the stairs, and I had no choice but to follow. Emma's weight in my arms a familiar burden. The mansion smelled the way I remembered. Lemon polish and old money, and the faint metallic undertone that might have been my imagination, but that I'd always associated with violence done in shadows. The East Wing was as far from Dante's personal quarters as you could get while still being in the same building. A small mercy, perhaps, or a calculated move to make me feel less trapped. The suite Mrs. Chen led us to was bigger than my entire apartment. 3 connecting rooms with thick carpet and furniture that probably cost more than I'd make in a lifetime. The children's room had been hastily prepared with 2 cribs, too small I realized. Emma and Lucas were long past cribs, but it would do for tonight. I'll have proper beds brought in tomorrow, Dante said, reading my expression. And clothes, toys, whatever they need, make a list. He laid Lucas down in one of the cribs with surprising gentleness and turned to take Emma from me. Our hands brushed in the transfer, and I felt that shock of electricity again. My body's betrayal still acute, even after everything. Once both children were settled, Dante straightened and studied me in the soft lamplight. I could only imagine what he saw, a woman who'd aged 3 years in 3 years, exhaustion carved into every line of my face, wearing clothes that had been washed so many times the fabric was thin enough to tear. I lifted my chin anyway, refusing to show shame for the poverty that had been my shield against his world. You're soaked through, he observed quietly. Mrs. Chen will bring you something dry. Shower, change, eat. I'll stay with them. I don't need... Elena. My name was a warning. You're shaking from cold and exhaustion. If you get sick, you're no use to them. So for once in your stubborn life, accept help. He was right, and I hated it. I was cold down to my bones, my clothes plastered to my skin, and the idea of a hot shower was almost painfully appealing. But leaving Emma and Lucas with him, even for 20 minutes, felt like relinquishing control I couldn't afford to lose. I won't hurt them, Dante said, and something in his voice made me look at him properly. Whatever you think of me, Elena, whatever I've done, I would die before I let harm come to my children. You have to believe that. The terrible thing was, I did believe it. Dante Moretti was a monster in many ways, but he had his own twisted code of honor. Family was sacred. Blood was everything, and now that he knew Emma and Lucas existed, they would be under his protection whether I wanted it or not. 20 minutes, I said finally. And if Emma wakes up, I'll come get you immediately. He moved to one of the plush chairs positioned between the cribs, lowering himself into it with the easy grace of a predator at rest. In the soft light, with his attention focused on the sleeping children, he looked almost human, almost like the man I'd fallen in love with before I'd learned what his last name really meant, Mrs. Chen appeared at the door with an armful of clothing, expensive my size, probably belonging to one of the female staff members, or procured with frightening efficiency from somewhere in the mansion. She guided me to my room, pointing out the ensuite bathroom with its marble counters and shower big enough for 3 people. The hot water was a revelation. I stood under the spray until my skin turned pink, until the chill finally left my bones, until I could no longer tell if the water on my face was from the shower or from tears I refused to acknowledge. 3 years of careful distance, of hard-won freedom, destroyed in a single rainy evening. I was back in Dante's world, back in his orbit, and I had no idea how to protect my children from the gravity that would inevitably pull them deeper into his darkness. When I emerged, wrapped in a towel that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, I found clothes laid out on the bed, soft leggings and a cashmere sweater that felt like a cloud against my skin. No underwear, I noticed, which meant these had definitely been procured from somewhere in the house. The thought of wearing another woman's clothes should have bothered me more than it did, but I was too tired to care. Dressed and marginally more human, I made my way back to the children's room. The door was ajar, and I paused in the doorway, arrested by the scene before me. Dante sat in the chair, Lucas cradled in his arms. At some point, my son had woken and begun to cry, and Dante had picked him up, was now rocking him slowly while humming something low and melodic. A lullaby, I realized with shock, in Italian. Lucas's eyes were drooping, one small fist clutched in Dante's expensive shirt, completely trusting in a way that made my chest ache. "You're good at that," I said quietly, announcing my presence. Dante looked up, and in his expression, I saw naked vulnerability quickly masked. "My mother used to sing this to me before." He trailed off, and I filled in the blanks. Before she'd been killed in a rival family's attack. Before violence had become the only language the Moretti family understood. I moved into the room, checking on Emma. Still asleep. Her breathing easier now that the medication was working. When I turned back, Dante was watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "We need to talk," he said quietly, "about how this is going to work. There's nothing to work out. This is temporary, just until they're better. Then we go back to our life." His laugh was soft and humorless. "No, Elena, you don't get to decide that unilaterally anymore. These are my children. I have rights." "Rights?" Anger flared in my chest, hot and welcome after hours of fear and confusion. "You want to talk about rights? You gave up any rights when you chose to be a criminal. When you chose violence and power over everything else. I didn't choose this life. I was born into it." His voice remained low, mindful of the sleeping children, but I heard the steel beneath. "And everything I've done, every decision I've made, has been to protect my family, to keep them safe in a world that would destroy us given the chance." "And what about my safety? What about the night I heard you torturing someone in the basement? What about the mornings I'd wake up to find blood on your clothes? What about living every day knowing that the man I loved was capable of—" I stopped, closing my eyes against the memories. I couldn't raise children in that environment. I couldn't let them think that was normal. So instead, you raised them in poverty, made them suffer because of your pride. The accusation stung because part of me had always wondered if I'd made the right choice, if my children's cold apartment and irregular meals and constant worry was really better than the warm safety of Dante's wealth. Purchased with blood money, at least they have their humanity. I whispered. At least they're growing up learning that people aren't disposable, that problems can't be solved with violence, that their mother worked herself to exhaustion and still couldn't provide basic necessities. Dante stood carefully, settling Lucas back into the crib with practiced ease. Then he turned to face me fully, and in the lamplight, he looked every inch the dangerous man he was. "I'm not arguing that my world is perfect, Elena. I'm not even arguing that you were wrong to be afraid. But you can't deny that I can give them more. Better education, better health care, better opportunities. Everything. Everything except a moral compass. Then you'll provide that." He moved closer, not touching, but near enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "Stay. Not as my prisoner, not as my possession, but as their mother. Let me provide for them, protect them, give them the life they deserve. And you teach them morality, humanity, whatever values you think I lack. That's not how this works. You can't compartmentalize. They'll see who you are, what you do. They'll learn from your example. Then I'll be better." The words were quiet, fierce. "For them, I'll be the man you thought I was when you fell in love with me." "That man never existed," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Because sometimes, in moments like this, I saw glimpses of something in Dante that might have been real, something that might have been love before it had been twisted by power and violence into possession. "Maybe not," he conceded. "But he could exist, if you give me a reason to try." The offer hung between us, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Because I could see it, the life he was painting, Emma and Lucas growing up with every advantage, never hungry or cold or afraid. Me, freed from the constant exhaustion of survival, able to actually be present for my children instead of working myself to death to provide bare necessities. All I had to do was surrender, accept the golden cage, and pretend I didn't see the blood on the bars. "And what about Victoria?" I asked, latching on to practicality because emotion was too dangerous. "Your fiancé? The alliance with the Castellano family?" Something cold flickered across Dante's face. "That engagement is over. Has been since the moment I saw you again. The Castellanos won't be happy, but they're not stupid enough to start a war over it. Not when I'm willing to compensate them in other ways. Just like that? You throw away a political alliance. For my children?" Without hesitation, he reached out, catching a strand of my damp hair and tucking it behind my ear. The gesture was intimate, familiar, and I hated how my body responded to it. "You think I could marry another woman knowing my children existed? Knowing you were out there, struggling alone? You didn't know we existed until tonight." "No," he agreed. "But I knew I'd never stopped." He stopped himself, jaw tightening. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here now. They're here now, and I'm not letting you go again. You can't keep me prisoner, Dante. Eventually, I'll find a way to leave." His smile was sharp as a knife. "Then I'll find you. Again and again. However long it takes, however far you run." His thumb traced my cheekbone, and his eyes held mine with absolute certainty. "You're mine, Elena. You always were. The 3 years you were gone don't change that. And now that we have children together," his hand moved to cup the back of my neck, pulling me closer until I could feel his breath against my lips. "Now you're bound to me forever. There's no running from that." I should have pulled away, should have slapped him, cursed him, done anything to establish boundaries, but I was so tired, and his touch was so familiar, and some traitorous part of me wanted to believe his lies, wanted to surrender to the illusion that love could exist alongside violence, that safety could be bought with blood money. "I hate you," I whispered. But the words lacked conviction. "No, you don't." His lips were almost touching mine now, his voice a low rumble that I felt in my bones. "You hate what I am, what I do, the world I represent. But you don't hate me. If you did, you wouldn't have run. You would have just stopped feeling anything at all." He was right. And that was the cruelest truth of all. I'd loved Dante Moretti desperately, completely, and some part of me still did despite everything. That's why I'd run, because staying would have destroyed me, would have turned love into something toxic and consuming until there was nothing left of the woman I'd been. "This won't work," I said, but I didn't pull away. "We're too different. Want different things. You can't change who you are, and I won't compromise who I am." "Then we'll find a middle ground." His forehead rested against mine, and for a moment, we were just two people standing in the lamplight, not a mob boss, and the woman who'd run from him. For them. "We'll figure it out together." Emma stirred in her crib, making a small sound of distress. Instantly, we both turned toward her, the spell breaking. I moved to her side, feeling her forehead, still warm, but not burning like before. The medication was working. "You should sleep," Dante said quietly. "I'll stay with them tonight. If anything changes, I'll wake you." "I can't just... Elena." His hand on my shoulder stopped me. "You're exhausted. You'll be better able to care for them if you actually rest. Trust me for one night. Just one." I wanted to refuse. Wanted to plant myself in the chair and maintain my vigil, prove that I didn't need him, that I could handle everything alone. But my body was screaming for rest, and the bed in the next room was calling to me like a siren song. "One night," I agreed finally. "But tomorrow, we're setting boundaries, rules. This doesn't mean I'm staying permanently." His smile suggested he knew better, but he didn't argue. "Whatever you need to tell yourself to feel in control." I hated how well he knew me, how easily he could read the fears I tried so hard to hide, but I was too tired to fight anymore tonight. So I retreated to my room and collapsed onto the bed that was softer than clouds. My last thought before sleep claimed me was that I'd made a terrible mistake. That accepting Dante's help, even temporarily, was stepping back onto a path I'd fought so hard to escape. But with Emma's fever and Lucas's labored breathing still echoing in my mind, with the memory of 3 years of struggle and fear and exhaustion weighing on me, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Not yet. I woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the disorienting realization that I'd slept for 12 hours straight. My body ached in the way it does after exhaustion so profound that even rest can't fully erase it. But for the first time in 3 years, I'd slept without waking every hour to check on the children or listen for the building's various alarming sounds. Panic hit immediately. Emma. Lucas. I threw off the silk sheets. Silk. God, I'd forgotten what real luxury felt like, and stumbled toward the connecting door. It opened before I could reach it, revealing Mrs. Chen with a breakfast tray. "The children are fine, Miss Elena," she said quickly, reading my expression. "Mr. Moretti is with them. They woke an hour ago and their fevers have broken. Dr. Martinez examined them this morning and confirmed they're recovering well." Relief made my knees weak. "I need to see them." "Of course. But perhaps you'd like to eat first? Mr. Moretti insisted I bring you breakfast." The tray held more food than I typically ate in 2 days. Fresh fruit, pastries, eggs, bacon, coffee that smelled like heaven. My stomach growled traitorously, reminding me that I'd skipped dinner last night and had probably eaten nothing but crackers and coffee for the past week. "I'll eat with the children," I said, taking the tray from her and moving toward the door. The scene in the nursery stopped me in my tracks. The cribs were gone, replaced by 2 small beds with railings. Toys were scattered across a new playmat, expensive educational toys that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And in the middle of it all sat Dante on the floor, dressed in casual clothes I'd never seen him wear, with Emma in his lap and Lucas building a tower of blocks beside him. "Mama!" Emma's face lit up when she saw me, and she scrambled from Dante's lap to run to me, her small arms wrapping around my legs. "Mama, we got new toys, and Papa read us stories." Papa. The word hit me like a physical blow. In less than 24 hours, Dante had gone from stranger to father in my daughter's eyes. "Did he?" I managed, setting down the tray and kneeling to gather her into my arms. She felt cooler, more like herself, though her eyes were still slightly glazed with residual illness. "How are you feeling, baby?" "Better." She squirmed to be released, already wanting to return to the new toys. "Lucas is building. Come see." I looked up at Dante, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He looked different in the morning light, dressed in dark jeans and a simple black sweater. More human, less like the untouchable crime lord I'd fled from. His hair was slightly mussed, as if small hands had been running through it, and there was a softness around his eyes that made my chest tight. "They woke up asking for you," he said quietly. "But when I explained you were resting, they agreed to let you sleep. Emma's been teaching me about her favorite colors, and Lucas has decided I need to learn proper block stacking technique." As if to demonstrate, Lucas carefully placed another block on his tower, then looked up at his father for approval. Dante's smile was genuine, proud, and I saw my son's face light up in response. This was dangerous. More dangerous than threats or coercion. This domesticity, this glimpse of what our life could be, it was seductive in a way I hadn't prepared for. "We need to talk," I said, straightening, "about how this is actually going to work." After breakfast, Dante stood with the fluid grace of a predator, moving to the tray I'd set down. "The children need to eat, and so do you. Business can wait an hour." I wanted to argue, but Emma was already pulling me toward her new bed, eager to show me the books Dante had apparently read to her, and Lucas was bringing me blocks with the solemnity of a child sharing his most precious possessions. So I let myself be distracted, let myself sink into the simple joy of seeing my children happy and healthy, even as part of me whispered warnings about the price we'd pay for this comfort. Breakfast was chaotic and perfect, Emma talking nonstop between bites of strawberries, Lucas quietly eating while building increasingly complex block towers, Dante watching all of us with an intensity that made my skin prickle. He'd positioned himself so he could see the door, I noticed. And even in this domestic scene, his phone vibrated constantly with messages he ignored. "Marco wants to know what to do about the Castellano situation," he said eventually, glancing at his phone. "Apparently Victoria's father is demanding a meeting. The real world, intruding on our bubble. I'd almost forgotten that breaking off his engagement would have consequences beyond the personal." "What will you tell him?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral for the children's sake. that the engagement is over, and if he wants to maintain our business relationship, he'll accept that gracefully. Dante's tone was casual, but I heard the steel beneath. The Castellanos need me more than I need them. They won't push, and if they do— His eyes met mine, dark and uncompromising. Then they'll learn why people don't cross the Moretti family. The threat hung in the air, a reminder of exactly who and what he was. Emma, oblivious, continued playing with her new toys. Lucas had moved on to arranging blocks by color, his small face serious with concentration. "This is what I was afraid of," I said quietly, "that they'd grow up thinking violence is the answer to everything." "Violence isn't the answer to everything." Dante stood, collecting empty plates with surprising domesticity. "But sometimes it's the only answer. The world isn't black and white, Elena. The sooner they learn that, the better prepared they'll be. They're 2 years old. I'm not talking about teaching them violence now. I'm talking about reality." He moved closer, lowering his voice so the children wouldn't hear. "You want to raise them to be naive? To think that kindness and morality will protect them from people who would hurt them to get to me? I want to raise them to be good people, to value human life, to have consciences, and I want them to survive." His hand came up to cup my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone in a gesture that was becoming familiar again. "We're not enemies in this, Elena. We both want what's best for them. We just disagree on what that means." Before I could respond, his phone rang. Not vibrated, rang, which apparently meant something because his expression hardened immediately. He glanced at the screen, and I saw tension ripple through his shoulders. "I need to take this," he said, already moving toward the door. "Stay here. Don't leave this room." The command in his voice triggered every rebellious instinct I had, but he was gone before I could argue, the door closing firmly behind him. Through it, I heard his voice, sharp with anger, speaking rapid Italian. Mrs. Chen appeared moments later, as if summoned. "Is there anything you need, Miss Elena?" "What's happening?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Why is he upset?" She hesitated, loyalty to Dante warring with something that might have been sympathy for me. "There's been an incident at one of Mr. Moretti's properties. It's being handled." An incident. The euphemism could mean anything from a minor business problem to someone being murdered. This was Dante's world, violence lurking beneath a veneer of civilization, danger always one phone call away. "Mrs. Chen," I said carefully, "what happened to me? After I left, what did Dante do?" Her expression softened. "He searched for you. For months. Used every resource he had, called in every favor. I've never seen him like that. Desperate. Almost broken. When the months turned into years with no trace," she trailed off, shaking her head. "We all thought you must be dead. It was the only explanation that made sense. That he couldn't find you. The revelation settled over me like a weight. I'd known Dante would look for me, but I'd underestimated the intensity of it. I'd covered my tracks carefully. New identity, cash-only transactions, staying away from security cameras, never using the internet. I'd lived like a ghost for 3 years, and apparently it had nearly destroyed him." "He loves you," Mrs. Chen said quietly, "in his way. It might not be the love you wanted, but it's real. Love shouldn't feel like a cage." "No," she agreed, "but sometimes it does anyway, especially for men like Mr. Moretti, who've lost so much and learned to hold on too tightly to what remains." Emma chose that moment to bring me a stuffed bear from her new collection, demanding that I admire it properly. I pulled her into my lap, breathing in her familiar scent, baby shampoo and something uniquely hers, and tried not to think about how quickly she was accepting this new reality. Children were adaptable. It was a blessing and a curse. Dante returned 20 minutes later, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes still carrying shadows of whatever incident he'd been dealing with. He'd changed clothes, I noticed. The casual sweater replaced by a dress shirt and slacks, his armor against the world. "I need to go out," he said, his gaze finding mine. "Business that requires my attention. Marco will stay with you. We're prisoners then. You're protected." His jaw tightened. "There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing." He moved closer, crouching down so he was eye level with me while I sat on the floor with Emma. "Elena, I need you to understand something. The moment I claimed you and the children publicly, the moment I broke off my engagement for you, you became targets. My enemies will look for any weakness they can exploit. And you—" His hand came up to touch Emma's hair gently. "All of you are the biggest weakness I've ever had." The admission hung between us, vulnerable and honest in a way I hadn't expected. This was why he'd never wanted to love anyone, I realized, why he'd kept his distance from real emotional attachment. Because in his world, love was liability. "Then let us go," I said. "We'll disappear again. You can tell everyone it was a mistake, that the children weren't yours." "No," the word was flat, final. "That's not an option. They are mine, you are mine. And everyone who matters already knows it. Running now would just make you easier targets without my protection." He was right, and I hated it. By coming back here, by accepting his help even temporarily, I'd painted targets on all our backs. The only thing standing between us and his enemies now was Dante himself. "How long?" I asked quietly. "How long until it's safe?" His smile was bitter. "Define safe. In my world, there's no such thing as completely safe. But I can make you safer than you've been living in that apartment, scraping by, vulnerable to anyone who might have connected you to me. No one knew who I was. You don't know that. You can't know that." His hand moved to my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. "I've made a lot of enemies, Elena, some of them very patient, very thorough. If they'd found you before I did—" He didn't finish the sentence, but I saw the fear flash across his face. Real, visceral fear that he quickly masked. Emma yawned against my shoulder, still recovering despite the broken fever. Lucas had curled up on one of the new beds, his eyes drooping. They needed naps, needed continued rest and medication, and the kind of care I could finally provide here. "I'll stay," I said finally, the words tasting like surrender. "For now. Until they're fully recovered and until you've dealt with whatever fallout there is from your broken engagement. But Dante—" I waited until he was looking at me fully. "I'm not staying as your possession, not as some kept woman. If we do this, we do it as partners, as co-parents. You don't control me and I don't control you. But we make decisions about the children together. Done." His agreement came too quickly, and I saw the trap even as I walked into it. Because co-parenting meant staying in contact, meant being in his orbit, meant slowly being pulled deeper into his world, until the lines blurred, and I forgot where I ended, and his influence began. But what choice did I have? He was right about the danger, right about my vulnerability, right about being able to provide a better life for Emma and Lucas. All I could do was hold on to my sense of self, maintain my boundaries, and hope that 3 years of hard-won independence had made me strong enough to resist his gravity. "I need to go," Dante said, standing. "Marco will be outside the door. Mrs. Chen can get you anything you need. There's a phone on the nightstand. My direct number is programmed in. If anything happens, anything at all, you call me immediately." "What kind of anything?" "Anything that makes you uncomfortable, anyone you don't recognize, any feeling that something's wrong." His expression was serious, intense. "Trust your instincts, Elena. If something feels off, it probably is." The warning made my skin prickle. "You're scaring me." "Good. Fear keeps you alert. Alert keeps you alive." He moved to the door, then paused, looking back at where I sat on the floor with Emma drowsy in my arms and Lucas sleeping on the bed. "I'll be back for dinner. We'll talk more then about how this is going to work." Then he was gone, leaving me alone with the children and the uncomfortable realization that I'd just agreed to share my life with a man I'd spent 3 years running from. The room felt smaller without his presence, the luxury less appealing, the golden cage more apparent. Emma's breathing had evened out into sleep, and I carefully carried her to her bed, tucking her in beside her brother. They looked peaceful, healthy, safe. That was what mattered. I could endure anything for them, even this. I moved to the window, looking out over the manicured grounds. In the distance, I could see security personnel. 4 that I could count, probably more I couldn't. This was my life now, at least temporarily. Luxury purchased with blood money, protection that came with possession, comfort that felt like captivity. My phone, the cheap prepaid one I'd been using, was in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out, stared at it for a long moment, then powered it down and tucked it away. That life was over. The struggling single mother, invisible in the city, free but drowning, she was gone. I didn't know yet who I would become in her place. But I knew one thing: I would not lose myself again. Not to Dante's darkness, not to his world, not to the seductive comfort of surrendering to his protection. I had found my strength in poverty and struggle. Now I would have to find it again in luxury and danger, for Emma, for Lucas, for the woman I'd fought so hard to become. 3 weeks passed in a strange blur of domesticity and danger, of learning to navigate Dante's world while maintaining the boundaries I'd sworn to protect. Emma and Lucas recovered fully, their laughter filling rooms that had been silent for too long. They thrived under the attention, not just from Dante, but from Mrs. Chen, who doted on them, and even from Marco, whose scarred face would soften whenever Lucas brought him blocks to admire. But it was Dante's transformation that unsettled me most. He came home every evening, no matter what crisis demanded his attention. He read bedtime stories in that deep voice that made even Goodnight Moon sound like something dangerous and sacred. He learned their routines, their preferences, the difference between Emma's "I'm tired" cry and her "I want attention" cry. He was patient in ways I'd never imagined possible, present in ways that contradicted everything I thought I knew about him. And every night, after the children were asleep, we would sit in the library, neutral territory, and talk. About the children at first, then gradually, about everything else. The years we'd been apart, the life I'd built, the man he'd tried to become when he thought I was dead. I almost walked away, he told me one night, brandy glass warming in his hands while I nursed tea that had gone cold an hour ago. From all of it. The business, the family, everything. If you were dead, what was the point? But you didn't. No. Because walking away would have dishonored your memory. His smile was bitter, ironic, considering you left because you hated what I was. I didn't hate you, I said quietly, the admission escaping before I could stop it. I hated what loving you was doing to me. How I was disappearing, becoming just another beautiful thing you owned. I never wanted that. I know. And I did know now. But wanting and doing are different things. You loved me the only way you knew how. By protecting me, providing for me, keeping me close. You just didn't realize you were suffocating me in the process. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his drink. And now? Am I suffocating you now? I considered the question honestly. The past 3 weeks had been nothing like I'd expected. Yes, there was security everywhere. Yes, my movements were monitored. But Dante had kept his word. He didn't control me, didn't dictate my choices, didn't treat me like property. When I'd insisted on taking the children to the park, he'd assigned discreet security but let us go. When I'd wanted to enroll Emma in a music class, he'd made it happen without taking over the decision. No, I admitted. You're trying. I can see that. I'm terrified, he said suddenly, his eyes meeting mine with raw honesty. Every moment they're out of my sight, I'm terrified. Every car that passes too close, every stranger who looks twice, every phone call from Marco. I think this is it. This is when I lose them. Lose you. The vulnerability in his voice cracked something in my chest. Dante, I know it's irrational. I know I have the best security money can buy. But fear doesn't respond to logic. He set down his glass and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You asked me once why I became what I am. Why I chose this life. You said you were born into it. I was. But I could have walked away like some do, taken the money and disappeared, lived a normal life. His jaw tightened. I stayed because the night my mother was killed, I was 8 years old and hiding in a closet. I heard everything. Her screams, the gunshots, my father begging. And I did nothing. I was too afraid, too small, too powerless. I'd known his mother had been murdered, but he'd never spoken of it before, never shared the details that still haunted his eyes. I swore that night that I would never be powerless again, that I would be strong enough, ruthless enough, feared enough that no one would ever dare hurt my family. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the 8-year-old boy who'd hidden while his world ended. And then I met you. And for the first time in my life, I wanted something beyond power and fear. He trailed off, searching for words. I wanted to be the kind of man who deserved you. But I didn't know how to be that man and still keep you safe. So you built a cage instead. Yes. No excuses, no justifications, just truth. And you were right to leave, right to choose freedom over safety. I just wish... His voice cracked slightly. I wish I'd been able to give you both. The moment stretched between us, heavy with 3 years of pain and misunderstanding, and the slow, tentative rebuilding of something I was afraid to name. The Castellano situation is resolved, he said eventually, shifting back to safer ground. Victoria's father accepted compensation for the broken engagement. They're moving their alliance to the Marchetti family instead. And Victoria? Married someone from the Marchetti family 2 weeks ago, a practical woman. She never loved me. It was always about power and position. He paused. She did send a message, though, through intermediaries. What kind of message? His smile was sharp. A warning that you'd better make me happy, or she'll find a way to make you regret stealing her position. Ice shot through my veins. Is she a threat? No. Dante's certainty was absolute. She's smart enough to know that threatening you is a death sentence. It was just posturing, maintaining pride. I've made it clear through appropriate channels that you and the children are untouchable. Anyone who harms you will face consequences that make death look merciful. The casual way he spoke of such violence should have repulsed me. A month ago it would have. But now, with Emma and Lucas sleeping upstairs, with the knowledge of how many people would hurt them to hurt Dante, I felt a terrible gratitude for his ruthlessness. I'm changing, I said quietly. Being here, being with you again, it's changing me. I'm starting to accept things I never thought I would. Is that bad? I don't know. I met his eyes. I don't want to become someone who justifies violence, who thinks the ends always justify the means. But I also can't pretend anymore that the world is simple, that morality is always clear-cut. Welcome to the gray, Dante said softly. It's not comfortable, but it's honest. The library door opened, and Marco entered, his expression tense. Boss, we have a situation. The shipping container at Pier 7, Customs, is asking questions. Dante's demeanor changed instantly, the vulnerable man disappearing behind the mask of the crime lord. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests someone tipped them off. Tension crackled through the air. This was his world. The constant vigilance, the paranoia, the ever-present threat of betrayal and exposure. I need to handle this, Dante said, standing. It might be late when I get back. Be careful. The words escaped before I could stop them, revealing more than I wanted to admit. He paused, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then he crossed the distance between us in 3 strides and kissed me. Hard, possessive, desperate. It was our first kiss in over 3 years, and my body remembered even as my mind screamed warnings. I tasted brandy and danger, and the complicated truth that I'd never stopped wanting him, even when I'd hated what he represented. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with promise. We're not finished, you and I. This conversation, he gestured between us. It's not over. Then he was gone, taking Marco and half the security detail with him, leaving me alone in the library with the taste of him on my lips and the uncomfortable realization that I was falling back into his orbit. Not helplessly, not without awareness, but inevitably nonetheless. The weeks turned into months. Summer came, hot and humid, and I watched Emma and Lucas grow in ways that both delighted and terrified me. They were happy, genuinely happy, in ways they'd never been in our cold apartment. They had stability, attention, everything children needed to thrive. And Dante kept his promises. He didn't control me, didn't cage me, didn't try to remake me into something compliant and decorative. Instead, he courted me. Slowly, patiently, like a predator who'd learned that some prey required a gentler approach. Dinners at restaurants where he'd rented the entire space so I wouldn't feel exposed. Walks in the garden while the children napped, where he'd tell me about his day and actually listen to mine. Small gifts that showed he'd been paying attention. A book I'd mentioned wanting, art supplies because I'd told him I used to paint. A jade plant because I'd said I missed having something green to care for. He was careful with me in ways he'd never been before. Patient when I pulled away, understanding when I needed space. Present, but not overwhelming. It was seductive, this new version of Dante Moretti, the one who'd learned from past mistakes, who was genuinely trying to be better. But I never forgot what he was capable of. The nights he came home with blood on his cuffs that he thought I didn't notice, the phone calls he took in Italian, his voice cold and final. The way people looked at him with fear, even as they showed respect. He was still a monster. He was just a monster who loved his children and was learning to love their mother without consuming her. 6 months after that rainy night at the crosswalk, I stood in the nursery watching Emma and Lucas sleep. They'd graduated to toddler beds now, decorated with their favorite colors and characters. They looked peaceful, safe, loved, everything I'd wanted for them when I'd run away. Achieved through the man I'd been running from. "You're thinking too hard," Dante's voice came from the doorway, low and intimate. I can hear it from down the hall. I turned to face him. He was in his shirt sleeves, tie loosened, looking tired but content, more human than monster in the soft lamplight. "I was thinking about choices," I said quietly. "About how 3 years ago I chose freedom over safety, and now I'm choosing both, somehow." "Are you?" He moved closer, not touching but near enough that I felt his warmth. "Or are you still waiting for the other shoe to drop? Still convinced this is temporary?" "Isn't it?" I challenged. "This domesticity, this version of you who reads bedtime stories and kisses scraped knees. How long before the real Dante Moretti comes back? The one who solves problems with violence and doesn't understand why I flinch." He never left Elena. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone in the gesture that had become familiar again. "I'm both men. The father who loves his children, and the criminal who protects them with blood if necessary. You don't get to separate them. They're the same person." "I know." The admission hurt. That's what I'm struggling with, because I love watching you with them. I love seeing you be gentle and patient and everything I never thought you could be. But I also know what you did last week to the man who tried to steal from you. Dante's expression hardened. He betrayed the family. There are consequences for that. He had children too. A wife who's now a widow. He should have thought of that before he stole from me. No remorse, no guilt, just the cold pragmatism that was at his core. In my world, loyalty is everything. Betrayal can't be tolerated, and that's what I can't accept, that black and white ruthlessness. Then don't accept it. His other hand came up, framing my face between his palms. Keep challenging me. Keep being my conscience. Keep reminding me that there's another way to be human. But don't ask me to be weak, Elena. Don't ask me to let threats to my family go unanswered just to maintain some moral purity. I'm not asking for moral purity. I'm asking for proportionality, for mercy when it's warranted. And when is it warranted? His eyes searched mine. When someone threatens my children? When they put you at risk? Where's the line, Elena? I didn't have an answer. That was the problem with gray areas. Nothing was simple anymore. I don't know, I admitted. But I think we figure it out together. I push you toward mercy. You pull me toward realism. And somewhere in the middle, we find something that works, a compromise. His smile was soft. I can work with that. He kissed me then, slow and deep, different from that desperate kiss months ago. This was a promise, a beginning, an acknowledgement that we were building something new from the ashes of what we'd been. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. "Marry me." I laughed, though it sounded more like a sob. "You're insane." "Probably, but I'm serious." He stepped back enough to meet my eyes. "Not because I want to own you or cage you, not even because of the children, though God knows I want them to have both parents fully committed, but because I love you, Elena. I loved you 3 years ago, and I love you now. And I'll love you 3 years from now when you're still arguing with me about proportional response and moral complexity. Love isn't enough. No, he agreed. But it's a start. And we've already proven we can coexist. We've built something here over the past 6 months. Something real. He was right. Against all odds, against every instinct that had told me to run, we'd built a family. Messy, complicated, morally ambiguous, but real nonetheless. I need time, I said. To think about it, to be sure. Take all the time you need. His hand slid down to intertwine with mine. I'm not going anywhere. Neither are you. We have the rest of our lives to figure this out. The presumption should have annoyed me. Instead, I felt something like relief because he was right. I wasn't going anywhere, not because I was trapped, but because I'd chosen to stay, chosen this complicated, dangerous, beautiful life we were building together. Okay, I said softly. Ask me again in 6 months. If we've survived that without killing each other, I'll say yes. His smile was brilliant, transforming his face from dangerous to devastating. Challenge accepted. Later, much later, I lay in my bed, still separate from Dante's, maintaining that boundary even as others blurred, and thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago. She'd been brave enough to run, strong enough to survive alone, fierce enough to protect her children at any cost. I was still that woman. But I was also someone new, someone who'd learned that strength could coexist with compromise, that love could survive in gray areas, that sometimes the right choice was the one that made your heart and your conscience reach an uneasy truce. Emma and Lucas would grow up knowing both worlds, the one I represented, with its emphasis on empathy and morality, and the one Dante represented, with its harsh pragmatism and protective ruthlessness. Maybe that made me a bad mother, failing to protect them from his darkness. Or maybe it made me a realistic one, preparing them for a world that was never as simple as I'd wanted it to be. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Dante asked again. We were in the garden, watching Emma and Lucas chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, their laughter bright against the shadows. Marco and the security detail were there but distant, giving us the illusion of privacy. Marry me, Elena. No ring, no grand gesture. Just those 3 words, and the weight of everything we'd built together. I looked at him. This man who was monster and father, criminal and lover, darkness, and the person who'd taught me that light could exist even in the shadows. I thought about the year we'd spent learning each other again, fighting and compromising and slowly building something that looked like partnership. Yes, I said, and watched his face transform with joy. He kissed me while our children played in the fireflies, while his security pretended not to watch, while the world we'd built together settled into something that felt almost like peace. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was ours. Messy and complicated and real. That night, after the children were asleep, Dante made love to me for the first time in over 3 years. It was different than before, less about possession, more about partnership. He touched me like I was precious but not fragile, desired but not owned, and when I fell asleep in his arms, finally sharing his bed, I felt something I'd thought lost forever. Home. The wedding was small, private, just family, and a few trusted associates. Emma was flower girl, Lucas was ring bearer, and neither of them understood why Mama was crying, even though she was smiling. Mrs. Chen wept openly, and even Marco's scarred face softened into something that might have been a smile. Dante vowed to love me, protect me, and never cage me again. I vowed to love him, challenge him, and never run away again. They were promises we'd probably break and remake 1,000 times over the years, but they were also a foundation, something solid to build on, even when everything else was shifting. 5 years later, I stood in the same garden, watching Emma and Lucas, 7 years old now, play with their baby sister Sophia. Dante was beside me, his hand warm in mine, his presence a constant I'd learned to trust again. Any regrets? He asked quietly, the question he posed every year on our anniversary. I thought about the woman I'd been, struggling alone in that cold apartment. I thought about the compromises I'd made, the moral flexibility I'd developed, the ways I'd changed to fit into his world while maintaining my core self. Only one, I said honestly, that I didn't trust you enough to try this 3 years earlier. that I wasted time running when we could have been building this together. You needed to run, he said, surprising me with his understanding. You needed to prove to yourself that you could survive without me, that you had strength independent of my protection. Otherwise, you never would have believed you were staying by choice. He was right. I'd needed those 3 years of struggle to become someone strong enough to stand beside him as an equal, rather than as a possession. I love you, I said, the words coming easier now than they had even a year ago. Monster and man, father and criminal, all of it. I love you too. He pulled me closer, pressing a kiss to my temple. Conscience and challenge, mother and partner, all of it. Sophia shrieked with laughter as Lucas swung her around, and Emma called for us to watch her cartwheel. Our children. Safe. Loved. Growing up in a world that was complicated but theirs. They would have to navigate the gray areas we'd created, would have to reconcile their father's darkness with their mother's light. But they would do it together, as a family. And that, I thought, watching Dante scoop Sophia up while Emma and Lucas demanded equal attention, was worth every compromise, every moral complexity, every moment of uncertainty. We'd built something real from impossible circumstances. Something that looked like love, felt like family, and tasted like hard-won happiness. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself, but it was the life I'd chosen, again and again, day after day, and that made all the difference. The rain had stopped years ago, but we'd finally found our way home.